Daniel Huerta, thank you for being here on the show. Daniel is the digital marketing manager at Udacity. Before that, he headed up marketing at Workify, which is an HR tech startup, for over 4 years, running their content and demand generation efforts. And he's also the co-host of the Modern People Leader podcast, which is interesting because this is the Modern Startup Marketing podcast. So we've got that modern that's similar between us.
It sounds good.
It does sound good. Yeah. Everyone wants to be more modern, right?
They do.
Udacity was founded in 2011. It is a pretty big organization now. It's 2,000 plus people and based out of Mountain View, California. And we'll also be talking about Workify, the HR tech startup. It was founded in 2014, 11 people, and based out of Austin, Texas. Just to give a quick background on the funding, Udacity has had $235 million total funding, and Workify has had $1.3 million total. So what I find, say that one more time.
Pretty big contrast.
Big contrast, and I find that to be really interesting, and that's why I wanted to have you on here, is like the contrast of this like company that's much larger, has much more funding. Things are going to be working well and not working well at large organizations, right? And then Workify, you have to be lean, and also things are going to be working well and not as well. So just gonna want to ask you some questions, dig a little bit deeper, and find out your experience. But before I do that, let me give a little bit of a rundown on what these companies do. So Udacity's mission is to train the world's workforce in the careers of the future. I think it's extremely important, especially today, as people are thinking about like where is the career trajectory going and what should they be doing, and should they be nervous about robots taking over their jobs and all that stuff, right? So learning, for example, digital, data science, programming, AI, cloud computing, cybersecurity, so much. And over 100,000 Udacity graduates have come out of the program, which is really awesome. And then 200 plus industry experts actually build out the content. And finally, 100 plus enterprise customers exist globally for Udacity. So that's Udacity. Workify, and I would love your help on like explaining what it is, but basically helps unlock the power of your people, modern employee engagement. And so that's all I wanted to say for now. But I wanted to turn it over to you and ask you and tell you thanks for being here, but also ask you to help me understand Workify a bit more.
Yeah. So, well, first off, thanks for having me. So Workify, I guess the simplest way of explaining what they do, they help companies collect, analyze, and take action on employee feedback. And I'm sure you've been the recipient of an employee feedback survey in the past. So that's like the product that the consumer, that the employee is seeing. But I think the main sell for Workify and what makes them really unique is the level of analytics and reporting that they provide. So I think they like to say that it's the same level that you would get with an in-house data analytics team. So with most engagement vendors, you're getting like a pretty static report that lets you go maybe one level deep into your data, and that's it. So if you're an HR practitioner and that's what you have to work with, it can be difficult to really get to the root of your engagement issues. But with Workify, they have embedded dashboards from business intelligence tools that are really robust. So you can get in there like 4 or 5 levels deep, create all these cool dashboards and reports. So that's really the big sell, because if you wanted to do that in-house, you'd have to hire a team of in-house data analysts that know how to use SQL, that know how to use Tableau, that know how to use Power BI. But with Workify, you get all of that as a part of your package.
Awesome. Thank you for summing that up for me. Is there anything I missed about Udacity and explaining like what they do and who they're for?
No, I think you gave a really good explanation. So I work for the enterprise side of the business, so the B2B side of the business. And the way that I've been describing it is we're helping traditional organizations become more like tech companies. And that came from a post I actually put out maybe a few months ago. We were coming off the heels of doing a marketing and sales push for the financial services industry. So we were trying to get really targeted and put together an ABM campaign for financial services. And when you think of financial services, you have the traditional companies like Bank of America, and then you have the challenger companies within financial services, like companies like Chime or Robinhood or those types of companies. And these incumbents are battling with these new challenger companies for talent. They're battling for market share. So and when you think about the difference between the two, so if you just compare Chime to Bank of America, and you ask somebody what's the difference between these two companies, more than likely what they're going to say is one is a bank and one's a tech company, right? But they both offer banking. Just one is a tech company that happens to offer online banking, and the other one is a bank. So I think that for Fortune 500 companies to succeed going forward, they're going to have to make that same sort of mindset shift. And you go from saying, we're a financial services company to we're a tech company that happens to provide financial services.
And why would you say that's important? Like, why should Bank of America start thinking more like a tech company and in its offerings more like a tech company?
Yeah, I think it all comes down to delivering a really good customer experience. And these days, you're not able to do that if you don't have the data scientists that can get into the data and tell you like where things are falling off, or if you don't have the machine learning engineers who know how to build this into your product. I just feel like having great technology is considered table stakes. So if you're a Fortune 500 company and you don't have amazing technology, the consumer is automatically going to think that you're not credible. They're going to think, I'd rather go do my banking with Chime, or I'd rather whatever it is. So the example that I always think of is Domino's. Like, Domino's has got this stuff figured out. They even say we're not a pizza company. We're a tech company that delivers hot food. And I think until these larger corporations start to do the same thing, they're just going to keep falling behind all of the new entrants into their market. But once they can make this mindset shift, it's going to attract a new type of talent, right? Because if you're a computer science graduate and you're comparing your options, and it's either go work for Bank of America or go work for Chime's probably going to sound like a way sexier gig to you. So yeah, that at Udacity, we're saying, hey, you're trying to become more like a tech company. Let us help you get there. You have smart people at your company. You have loyal people. Let us help you give them the skills they need to for your company so that you can compete with these challengers that you're going up against.
I love that. That definitely dug way deeper. I just basically took some, statements off of the website. So I thank you for that. From your background at Workify, what are you bringing to Udacity and your role at Udacity? And obviously, you were probably wearing a lot more hats when you were at Workify than you are at Udacity. But what would you say is like the number one or like a couple of things that you're bringing into your role?
That's a really good question. So I'd probably say I've always had a beginner's mindset. So just to give a little bit of background, I started at Workify when I was a junior in college, and I was an advertising major. I knew that I wanted to get into marketing. I didn't know really what that meant, but I was like, oh, marketing, that sounds cool. I'm an advertising major, like they go hand in hand. So I get this internship. I'm doing everything from sales to CS to marketing to QAing for products. So really, I'm getting to see all facets of the business. So again, that beginner's mindset, I'm just learning. And then I make it known I want to take on all of the marketing responsibilities. So, we started with Google AdWords, then it was marketing automation, and then it was, having to figure out how to use a content management system, and the list goes on. So, as you said, I was wearing all of these different hats, and I had a beginner's mindset. So everything that I was doing was brand new to me, and I was learning it for the first time. And fast forward to today, and that was invaluable experience. I feel like the breadth of knowledge I have when it comes to marketing is way deeper than a lot of marketing people, because I think a lot of people, they'll start in one facet and then just kind of stick to that and become an expert at that, which is also really cool. But I think I bring that, I guess, like full stack marketer type of capability to Udacity. And again, the beginner's mindset. Like I've never marketed an enterprise only product. So again, this is a learning experience for me. I don't have all the answers, and I don't think I ever will in my career. And that's just the mindset that I've tried to have. And I think that can be really valuable for the marketing team.
Absolutely. So there are online schools and accelerator programs and expert communities. And I'm thinking about like Udacity versus these other players in the space, platforms like Patreon that are making it possible for experts to teach specific material, to go deep on some material. How does Udacity think about these other players and try to differentiate from them?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So I'd say that on the enterprise side, at least, we don't really go up against the expert communities that are popping up on Patreon or anything like that. I'd say that our biggest competition is probably either in-person training. So let's say, a company like AT&T, I'm just throwing a random name out there. Let's say they needed to upskill 100 people within their company. The other options are either in-person training, which isn't very scalable, and the environment we're in isn't very conducive to that either, given that we're all remote. So that's one option, and it's really expensive, but it goes really deep into any subject that you want to go into. And then you have MOOCs, which means massive open online courses, and these options they're also solid, but for the most part, they have 1,000 different courses on machine learning, but all of them only go an inch deep, and it's not highly curated. So at Udacity, we're trying to provide almost like that in-person boot camp feel, but at scale. So it's more affordable. If you're trying to upskill, let's say 50 people on your team to have data science skills, it's going to be much easier doing that with Udacity than it is any of these other options.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. And I know that you're focused on enterprise, and that's completely different experience from like someone that then comes home and wants to learn more about X, right?
Yeah.
And then they might go.
And the one other thing that I would say is we're not just providing like an out of the box experience, it's highly customized. So we have a client success team that's working with our clients to figure out, one, like what are the biggest technology initiatives that they have going on at their company, and two, like within those initiatives, where do they have the biggest gaps? Do they currently have enough people to accomplish those initiatives? And if not, we're going to put together a custom plan to identify a set of employees that would be capable or would have some compatibility with those skills, get them enrolled, and then we're creating custom learning paths. So depending on their tech stack, there might be a different course that they're enrolling in for machine learning, right? Or a different course they're enrolling in for becoming a data analyst, if it's a Power BI shop versus a Tableau shop. So we're working with them to create like a very customized solution that's going to help them achieve some of these big technology initiatives that they have.
Awesome. Thank you for that information. So let's talk about Workify versus Udacity. Clearly completely different companies in terms of like funding amount, size, right? Complexity, right? what are some big similarities that you see across both and some big differences in how you approach marketing specifically?
Okay, that's a good question. So,
Why the big sigh?
well, the similarities, I feel like there's probably not as many similarities as you would think. I guess the one similarity, both solutions are somewhat selling into HR. Workify more so, that's the buyer. With Udacity, HR is more of an influencer. So they're not as involved in the buying process, but they get more involved post sale. So I'd say that's probably the biggest similarity, just the involvement of HR. Um, so the audience is completely different. With Workify, the sweet spot was 500 employees to 5,000 employees, right? That was like anything lower than 500, and the companies just weren't getting as much value. And then anything over 5,000, they started having different types of requirements. So that was the sweet spot. But for Udacity, it's all enterprise. So think of the biggest companies in the world, and those are the companies we're going after. So the deal cycles are slower. The way that you market to them is different. Another big difference that I would say is that for a company like Workify, if you're selling employee engagement software, you can turn on Google Ads for a handful of keywords, and you can capture demand immediately. Because every day there's going to be thousands of people going online and typing best employee engagement software. But for Udacity, it's not as mature of a market, so you don't really have that demand that's going to Google every day and searching for something like what we do. So I'd say that's another big difference. What else?
People are probably not like, if you're buyer, are they execs at these large enterprise companies?
Yes.
So they're
So
probably not doing a Google search. They're
exactly,
probably
they're not.
talking to other people, like, I have this problem. How do you go about fixing it?
Yeah. And I think a lot of it is probably word of mouth, because we have this really strong consumer brand, where, it's a trusted brand. A lot of people have gone through Udacity nano degrees and seen the value from it. And a lot of them are data scientists or software engineers, product managers. So I imagine a lot of it's them telling their boss, like, hey, I took a course with Udacity and it was amazing. They have an enterprise product. You should check it out for our team. I imagine that's probably like how a lot of the business we're getting, just by the name recognition. But yeah, like you said, I don't think the CTO of IBM is going to go to Google and type in, best platform to upskill my employees. They're probably going to ask their peers what they're using.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. So the way that you approach marketing and the way that you approach the strategy has to align with like your buyer, right? If you're going to do it well, it has to align with how your buyers find out about you,
Mm-hmm.
decide to use you, right? And so that's really important across both, like huge companies. So I would say that's a big similarity, huge company, small company. Does a bigger budget does that mean that you're able to do better marketing? Like, what have you seen? Because clearly Udacity has a bigger budget,
Yeah.
but what have you seen that's like both good and bad about that? And from the Workify perspective too, like smaller budget, what have you seen there? Are you able to work with a small budget and still be nimble and powerful?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I'd say that having a bigger budget does not mean that you can do better marketing. It just means that you have more resources. I think that you can do just as good of marketing without a fancy tech stack and a very limited budget. All you need to have is a clear point of view and a set of channels where you can get in front of the audience that you're trying to sell to. I honestly think that's it. I think that a lot of people get too caught up in buying expensive tech stack, whether it's like buying the ABM platform or thinking that getting a marketing automation platform is going to solve all of their problems, when in reality they should be, focusing on that core message that they're getting out there and making sure that it's very different than what everybody else is saying, so that people know why they are different. I think that's like the most important thing. And then once you can figure that out, then you can start turning on the paid channels. And if you work for a bigger company, it makes it easier to do so. I'll say that it is a lot easier. Like just for example, so one thing that we're doing drastically different today at Udacity than we did a year ago is how we use our paid social channels. So from just for some context, prior to 2020 at Udacity, I think there was like a 1.5 year gap where there wasn't a marketing team. So I came on to Udacity as the 3rd or 4th employee on the enterprise marketing team. And we were essentially starting from a blank slate. We didn't have access to historical data that was going to tell us which channels we should be on and what we should be doing. So it's just been a matter of running a lot of experiments. And one experiment that we ran from probably March 2020 to about end of Q3 2020 was using paid social, so Facebook and LinkedIn. We're using metadata.io to create audiences for Facebook. We were running the classic playbook that every B2B company runs, which is push people to gated content and then just hope and pray that they convert to a meeting and to an SQL and eventually, to a close one deal. And like 2 or 3 months into it, I was like, this is not working. We're generating all of these leads, but nothing is happening with these leads, and we're spending a good amount of money. We have this tech stack. We're spending a lot of money on the ad channels. I was like, we need to try something different. And I, at that point, was like, all right, well, I'm seeing all of this buzz all over LinkedIn about how there's a different way to use your paid channels. And so given that we do have a budget, I was able to reach out to Refine Labs and say like, hey, we need an agency to help us figure out how to do this a different way.
Oh, I had no idea. I brought you on here and I had no idea that there was that connection.
Yeah. And
That's
cool. It was a really scary decision, right? Because we're going from like this tried and true playbook where it's predictable, it's going to happen, and you can report back on those leads and kind of feel good about it. But in my gut, I knew this wasn't the right approach. So reached out to them, started working with them in like October of 2020. And we've kept our spend relatively flat since we started, but just by changing how we think about our paid social, it's made a huge difference. I mean, it's hard to like directly attribute anything, like I'm sure you're aware of, but just looking at website requests. So Q3 of 2020, that was the last quarter we were using the old approach. I think we had around like 270 website requests. Q4 went up to about 500. Q1, it was up to 1,000. So it's working. And I think there's, to be quite honest, that the new meetings are probably lagging a bit, but we're seeing some positive impact with pipeline too. So for the past 2 quarters, the pipeline has been double what it was in Q3, 2 quarters in a row. So we're seeing some good results. It's still scary because there's still sort of like a black box component. Even if you have all of your attribution stuff set up the right way, it's still a little bit scary, but I'm feeling good about the change.
That's so cool. I honestly had no idea, and I highly respect Refine Labs and Chris Walker, and I did not know that you guys are, I know he's had, different clients along the journey, but that's super cool that he's been able to make that impact for you guys. And we have a very similar mindset in what you just said, right? Like we were running the old playbook of gated content and setting up the meeting to SQO to closed one, and it just wasn't working and we needed help. And lo and behold, right? Like the modern way of thinking about demand generation actually is working for you guys. So that's super cool to hear. And I'm also like kind of shocked that there was nobody doing, like Udacity is so big, but there was nobody on the marketing front for that long.
Yeah. So I'm probably going to botch this, but the enterprise solution was started by this guy named Alper. He was our chief product officer at Udacity, and he had a hunch that there might be something there with an enterprise solution. So him and like a ragtag team of like 5 or 6 other people were running enterprise for 2 years. And just by them having this small team, they were able to grow it to a certain size. They then started hiring sales folks pretty quickly, and that's how they've gotten all their growth. So just like pure outbound, just knocking on doors, taking names. Like that's how they grew the business to where we're at today. And it's almost the reverse of how I'm sure a lot of companies probably like their growth playbook. Maybe not, I don't know. But yeah, it was interesting coming into a company where we had a really strong sales pipeline with zero marketing.
Yep. Yes, that's right. And it gets harder over time, right? Because the more pipeline, the more the more salespeople you need to hire, that gets costly. And like, where is that flywheel that you create where you don't have to bring on more SDRs, more salespeople, right?
Yeah.
That's where marketing comes in. So I'm a big believer in that. So let's go back to Workify. How did you, and if I'm mistaken about these numbers, let me know. How did you grow the ARR from 40,000 to 1.2 million from your content and demand gen efforts? Like, tell me about that time. Was it just you? What did you do first? What was effective there? Like, what marketing channels? What content?
Yeah, so it was just me on the marketing side, but Workify's CEO and we work very closely together. So marketing was a priority for him. So I didn't feel like I was alone on an island, right? Like it was something that we were both figuring out. Like I said, I came into the company as intern, not knowing anything. So I had to sort of teach myself all of these skills and just figure it out on the fly. But to answer your question, it was focus. We picked 2 channels and we tried to get as good at those channels as we possibly could. So for us, it was AdWords and it was outbound marketing. So because we knew that those are the 2 channels that we wanted to focus on, every week we were, making changes to the ad copy. We were running A/B tests. We were running A/B tests on the landing pages. We were playing around with different keyword types or match types. Like, I just think that focusing on 1 or 2 channel first before trying to do everything at once. If there was like one thing that I could stress, I think that every company should do that, because it can be easy to fall into the trap of, okay, we need to do AdWords, YouTube pre-roll, paid social display. But it's like, no, you don't. You just need to pick the channel where you know that you're going to get a lot of traffic or where you're going to get the most traction. Start there, get really good at it, and then you can start to kind of layer on top of that. So it was AdWords, as I said, and pretty straightforward. Just I'd say that most of our SQLs were coming from high intent keywords. So there was probably, and we did make the mistake of trying low intent and high intent keywords. After a few months, and at first it was really exciting with the low intent keywords because it was like the low intent keyword to ebook. So we were generating all of these leads and we're like, oh, this is awesome. Like, we're getting all of these leads. Surely they'll convert into SQLs, but they don't, as you know. So if I could go back, I'd probably not turn those on ever and just focus on the high intent keywords. But I'd say that drove majority of our pipeline. I mean, it was driving something like probably 40 SQLs a month, which is pretty good considering we had one person on the sales team. So they had a full schedule. And then the other thing was outbound marketing.
Yeah, tell me about that. Like, what does outbound marketing mean versus inbound?
Yeah, so working really closely with the SDRs, their outbound motion. So I guess the process that we had, and it for sure was not the most efficient process, but it's how we did it. We would put together. So it would all start with the accounts that we were picking. So we would pick probably 100 accounts a month to go after, and they would have to be within that, ideal customer profile fit. Like they had to like match very certain criteria. So we'd start with the companies. We would then do a lot of research, right? So for each of the accounts, we were going onto their websites, looking at their press releases, looking at their about page, seeing how they talk about themselves, seeing how they describe their culture. So how are they describing their values? So if we were selling an employee engagement software, that was obviously really important. Seeing if they just hired a new chief people officer, seeing if, maybe they just fired a chief people officer, going to their Glassdoor. So documenting all of these different data points. And then, so that's the hard work. And then once we've done all of that, going into Zoom Info, actually first going into LinkedIn using Sales Navigator and finding the 5 or 6 relevant contacts for each account, and then going into Zoom Info, getting that information, getting it into Salesforce, and then pushing that into, we were using Yesware at the time. I think now everybody uses like Outreach and what's the other one? Salesloft.
Salesloft, yeah.
Yeah, and then getting them into those email software platforms, whatever they're called, and doing a ton of A/B testing. So we just by having me and the SDRs looking at that data every week. So looking at the different subject lines and which ones had the highest open rates and response rates, looking at the arrangement of the emails and the cadence and seeing what was getting the quickest responses. Looking at little things like how can we add in just enough customization or tailoring to our email cadences, but not so much that we can't handle the bandwidth. And like I remember one thing that we did that really worked once we figured it out was, while we were in that research phase, finding an article. So either from their press release section or just by going to Google News and typing in the company and finding anything about the company that is relevant to people and culture, and including that in our first email. So that would be in the first touch, in the second touch of every cadence we sent out. And it was this weird thing. I think we'd tested out saying something to the effect of, "Congrats on XYZ," and it would be relevant to the article. And for whatever reason, that combination was really strong. And I remember at one point we were getting, I can't remember the metrics because it was so long ago, but I just remember it was really good. We were getting a ton of responses. We were getting a ton of meetings out of it, a ton of pipeline.
So are you saying that because I heard you say in the beginning that it's a lot of effort, that the SDRs do a lot of upfront work, right? You're focused on these accounts, you're doing a lot of research, you're doing these like A/B testing emails. That's a lot of work. That's a lot of time.
Yeah.
Did it actually, did it work? Because we also had this sort of play at another startup, and so the actual conversion from like getting a lead or getting someone to open an email or click through your email or do something, and then an SDR would reach out and talk to them, it was very low. So I'm just curious.
No, it worked. It worked for a while. It really did. It worked in a sense of, it got us a lot of at-bats. It got a lot of people on the phone, which was really surprising because, I don't know, me personally, I'm never going to respond to an outbound email. Again, this was like 4 years ago, 3 years ago. I feel like the effectiveness of outbound channels has probably gone down a bit. I think now it's drowned out. Like it's hard to cut through the noise as an SDR. I have a lot of empathy for SDRs and the work that they do, because man, it's hard to get in front of the right person through email now.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think it's even harder when the person is like, "I've never heard of you," right? You're a startup. Yeah. I've never heard of your brand. I don't know what you do. And suddenly I'm seeing an email from you and then I'm seeing 5 more or 8 more or 12 more.
Mm-hmm.
Like, why am I going to get on the phone with you, right? I think it's extremely hard if they
No,
don't know
it's
you or see
tough.
you. Yeah. So it sounds like it was successful for getting on the phone. I'm curious if it was successful to actually like close the deal.
Oh, it did not close at the same rate as inbound.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And so got it. So inbound, what kinds of things were you working on, like probably with more of your content, brand building stuff?
So we would do, for the most part, just webinars. That was like the main, that was the main, type of content that we're putting out there, putting together. And we had some success with that. Uh, I wouldn't say that it drove a lot of revenue. It was sort of the similar issue that we had with the ebook downloads. Like we were getting a lot of people in from these webinars, but it just wasn't enough to get them to actually take a meeting and be a serious opportunity in Salesforce.
Yeah, I think that this is definitely one of the challenges is like how do you position marketing to be like a revenue generating powerhouse, and so that it's not just like, okay, we help the SDRs get someone on the phone, but like how did we actually, and Chris talks about this. I'm sure you have conversations now that you're working, that now that you've been working with Refine Labs, is how,
Mm-hmm.
instead of like marketing influenced some revenue, marketing actually sourced the revenue. That's a
Yeah.
much more interesting and powerful conversation to be had, so that
Yeah.
you can increase your budget for marketing. And so how would you do things differently? Like thinking back to Workify, what do
Yeah.
you think? Where did these problems stem from? You think, like, why weren't the webinars working to drive revenue?
Well, I think,
Because they can, like,
yeah,
content
yeah.
can.
Oh, for sure, content can. I just think that, so there were a few things that I would do differently. Um, the biggest mistake that we ever made was, again, not having a unique point of view. We thought that if we were just like everybody else, that would get us in front of people. But at the end of the day, in the employee engagement space, you have companies like Culture Amp, you have companies like Tiny Pulse, and they have great brand recognition and brand trust. So if we looked exactly like our competitors, they were going to go with our competitors 10 out of 10 times, because if we're doing everything the same, but they have all of these sexy logos on their website, of course they're going to go with them. And so I would have leaned in heavily into what our customers loved about us. And it was the analytics. There was no other platform out there that provided the same types of data and reporting that Workify did. And if I were to go back, I would lean heavy into that and only talk about that, because if that's what makes them different, then that's what they should have been leaning into. So that was definitely the biggest learning. And then we already talked about some of the other stuff I would do differently. So paid social to ungated, would not have done that. I would have, tried using paid social as more of an awareness channel, similar to how we're doing at Udacity. Send people to product ads, brand ads. That would have been the playbook that I think we would have leaned into. And then on the content side, I think we overthought everything.
What do you mean by that?
So again, we would go and look at what our competition was doing, and we'd say, we need to create a blog like that, or we need to create a blog about that. When that's not, and then also we thought that everything we put out there had to be perfect. So we weren't shipping as frequently as we should have been. And it's funny, we had this guy who worked with us for a summer, and he was an entrepreneur from South America, and he was in Austin for the summer doing some program. So they paired this entrepreneur with our company, and one of the things he told us, he was like, I grew my business from creating YouTube videos every day. And we were like, what? Like YouTube videos? Like why would you do that? Like that doesn't make any sense. And he was so passionate about how he was talking about it and how it worked, but we never really fully bought into it. And 4 years later, I'm looking back and I'm like, oh, he was onto something. We could have done that. Whether it was YouTube or podcasting, if I could go back, I would have said, hey, Marcelo, you're right. We should do it this way. This is what people want. We need to create engaging content. We need to find, we need to partner with the people we're selling to and create content with them. And I actually, I work, so I don't work with the CEO at Workify anymore, but we co-host the Modern People Leader together. And I think he realizes now, the CEO, that this should have been the strategy all along for creating content. So, not only is it something that I'm passionate about and I want to talk about, I want to learn more about, but it's a marketing channel for Workify. And I think, yeah, I mean, if I could go back, that I would definitely start a podcast or do a YouTube series or something.
Yeah. That's so interesting that kind of like you met someone, they pitched it then to you and you're like, what's this guy talking about? This is not how B2B runs their marketing efforts. Like, who does podcasting? Who does as part of their strategy, right? Where everything else kind of falls out from there. But, and I also love that you mentioned like the mistake of why that didn't work is not that it was like the wrong thing to do necessarily, but like that was the foundational stuff that you didn't have, that unique point of view, that brand understanding, like what are people looking for? What are buyers looking for from your brand? The trust, and what do they love about you? And that seems like, well, just figure it out and move on and like start running your campaigns. But it is so vital to get that right. Otherwise, you're just going to be doing marketing for the sake of it. It's just busy work.
We were spinning our wheels. We were thinking about all the tactics, like, okay, we need to do SEO, we need to do marketing automation, we need to do paid search, instead of first taking a step back and saying, what's the core message we're trying to get out across these channels? And I think if we would have done that work, we would have had a much stronger message, and I think probably closed a lot more deals. The problem wasn't getting the deals created. It was just we weren't closing them because, again, we were going up against these incumbents who had huge market share and brand recognition. So
it's another great point of startups tend to look at the bigger players around them and think we got to do the same thing as them, and spend a lot of time analyzing like, well, what are they doing and what PR articles do they have out and what blog posts, and it's not about that. It's about like having a customer obsession is the most important thing, because even if you're small and you appeal to your like super fans and you understand what they love about you and you zero in on that and you get more fans and more people to like buy into that, and they will, because it's a unique point of view that you're bringing. Then they'll develop trust. So
in one really interesting thing to point out. So the CEO at Workify, he let me know, since we've started this podcast and since I've been more active on social media, I have 2 deals that are about to close because of it. Inbound deals that came through LinkedIn where people were reaching out to him saying, hey, you say some smart stuff. Like, I want to learn more about what your company does.
And you don't even work there anymore. You're just part of like the podcast effort.
Yeah, exactly.
I hope you're making some money off of that. I mean, I'm just kidding. I don't.
I'll bring it up.
That's actually really interesting and really cool to hear that. Okay, so let's talk about the Modern People. So you started saying like it's been something that you've been working with the CEO on even after you left the company. How's it going? Sounds like kind of pretty good. What are some ways that you're helping to grow this podcast and like growing listeners? I'm curious because I've got, this podcast here, and I'm always eager to talk to other folks that have also, we started kind of around the same time with our podcast.
Yeah, I started like last week in December. When did you start?
November. Yeah.
So okay, within a month. Okay, so let me go back to June 2020. Well, I'll even go further back than that. So I've worked in HR tech for about 6 years now on the marketing side. And as I said, I've worked in a sales capacity, I've worked in a CS capacity. So I've had a lot of interaction with great HR people, and I just enjoy being around them. And I think that HR is the most important function within any business. At the end of the day, your company or your business is your people. So if you're able to tap into that power and get people fully bought in and make them happy, that's just a game changer. And I feel like COVID has only magnified this fact for me in my head. And I think that more people are going to realize how important the people function is, and that it does really drive business results. So mid 2020, all of this is swirling through my head, and I make the decision to double down on the HR tech space. Like, this is the space that I want to be in for a really long time. I could see myself being in HR tech for the rest of my career, whether it's in a marketing capacity or whatever. So I'm laying in my bed in November 2020, and I'm like, okay, how can I learn more about the HR space? And that's when I had the idea about the Modern People Leader. Like, the easiest and best way to get in front of people in HR is to start a podcast and give them a reason to talk to me. So a week or two later, I call the CEO of Workify, who is actually my second cousin. So we're family. So it's like not weird that we're still in close contact. And I was like, hey, let's start a podcast. And I pitched him on the idea and how it would be mutually beneficial, and explained, why he should have a podcast, whatever. But selfishly, like, I've always wanted to start a podcast. I'm a huge podcast nerd, and I just love listening to podcasts. And it's something that I've always wanted to try my hand at. And then, lastly, I don't know, it just like provides a creative outlet for me. And I think that's so big. So to your question, how's it going? It's going well. It's not like mind-boggling numbers. So we're 3 months in. We have 19 episodes that are out, and I'd say that each episode gets on average like around 70 plays. So the really good episodes will get closer to 100, and the ones that aren't as popular closer to like 40. But I didn't really have any expectations going in. I was just going to be happy if like anybody listened to it. So the fact that, about 70 people are tuning in every episode kind of blows my mind.
It's crazy. I just want to say that like people listening for 30 minutes, 40 minutes over and over, right? You get new people that start from the very beginning, and then hopefully the growth chart is showing you
Yeah. I use
that
it so I can.
Yeah. It's just it blows my mind, but I think it just goes to show that people are also just as interested in this stuff as you are. You have a passion, you want to talk to these people, you want to learn. There are people out there that are into this as well. And even if it's 40 or 70 or 100, whatever it is, it's meaningful for these people. And that's what counts. And it sounds like it's actually helping Workify's business too. And that's probably wasn't your like number one reason to start this, but it's having that effect on the business.
Yeah, no, I guess from my end, I not only wanted to learn everything I can about it, but I wanted to be more involved in the HR community, even though I'm in marketing. So what better way to do that than produce high quality content and share it on my LinkedIn feed? So I guess going into like how we're growing listeners, I feel like this is the standard playbook now, but basically finding the 2 or 3 best clips from each episode, turning those into social media clips with a fancy headline and some formatting, and posting on LinkedIn, and, trying to include anecdotes, trying to make it personal. I feel like that really helps. That's really the main way that we're growing it. The other way that we're getting people to the show is through the Workify email newsletter. So Workify has a newsletter where I think there's probably 50, 60,000 people in it. And whenever we have a really good episode where we're like, shit, that one got the most views, we should probably promote that through the newsletter. That's how we're growing it. So not only LinkedIn, but leveraging this email database that we have of of a bunch of HR folks. So it's the perfect people for what we're putting out there. And then I'd say the last thing that I do, and it's hard for me to quantify if this is actually making a difference, but I try to connect with 40 to 50 people on LinkedIn every day, just using Sales Navigator. So making sure that it's the right type of person, right title, right type of company. And then once I connect with them, reaching out to a handful that look really interesting and saying, hey, like, let's have an off the record chat. So I'm not even recording a podcast. I'm just talking to these people, getting to know them. What's their job like? And again, I don't know if I can quantify the effect of that, but I feel like I've built some pretty good relationships and connections just by doing that. And I feel like that goes a long way. And then the last thing, I wouldn't say this was deliberate, but we've seemed to have been able to break into a few pods. So when I say that, I mean, we've found pods of HR professionals that are all like in the same networking group that meet up on their own like every few weeks. And it was like once we got one onto the show, we were able to get 2 or 3 others. And now like everyone in Boston HR probably has heard of the Modern People Leader. So I don't know if we're going to be able to do that on a repeatable basis, but if we can find other pods, I feel like that's been really helpful as well.
That's awesome. The one other thing, I think that you shared so many great tips here on growing listeners. The one other thing that has been recommended to me is don't undervalue other podcasts that are in similar realm as you. And yeah, and getting on their show and talking to their audience and kind of, and if it makes sense, having them on too. But podcasters that have been doing this for longer than us, that have like 1,000 episodes or more, they have a huge audience. And
no, sorry, I was gonna say I have one more idea, but I'll let you finish.
Oh no, that's it. You tell me, what was your idea?
We haven't tested this yet, but kind of tapping into that idea of pods, we thought, how about we reach out to the 3 or 4 guests from the most popular episodes and say, hey, I'm sure you have like 2 or 3 best friends within the HR space that you've been hanging out with or networking with or mentoring, or maybe they're mentoring you, that you've met over your career. Why don't you come back on and bring 1 or 2 of those people? Because I've found that it's not really my posts that are getting the traction. I mean, it is and it isn't. Like, I get decent traction, but it's whenever that person that we have on likes the post, or when that person we have on shares a post talking about their experience being on the podcast. I feel like that's actually been the biggest driver of new listeners, because it's one thing for them to hear me talking about the podcast and how great it is and how great this guest was. But if that guest takes the time to write a post or to like it or to comment, then everybody on their feed is now seeing it. And chances are they're connected to a lot of people within that audience that we're trying to tap into. So my idea is have 2 or 3 people on the show, and that effect that you're getting from that one person liking a post or sharing, you're now going to get from 2 or 3 people all for the same episode. So haven't tested that out yet. It would be a completely different podcast format, but that's just something I had in the back of my mind that we want to test out.
I love that idea. Thank you for sharing that. That's really cool. I've seen that a little bit, and I was wondering like, what's the difference if I have 1 or more people on? But that is such a great benefit from it. And this stuff keeps you creative, right? This is like your mind is spinning. Like, what are some ways to make this even more impactful? So thank you, Daniel, for coming on to the show. If anybody wants to reach Daniel, you can find him on LinkedIn. It's Daniel Huerta, but there are a bunch of numbers after your name, probably because there are a bunch of Daniel Huertas out there.
Yeah, I thought about changing that, and then I didn't, because
that's okay.
I have a number after it.
That's okay. I'll include a link to your profile in the show notes. And to find out more about Udacity, you can go to udacity.com. To find out more about Workify, you can go to getworkify.com. Thank you, Daniel.
No problem. Thanks for having me.